Hey, welcome to High Resolution. My name is Bobby Ghoshal.
And I'm Jared Arandu.
We're sitting down with 25 masters of the design industry. For the last few weeks, you guys have been reaching out to us, telling us all sorts of things about what you're learning. You've been asking us questions. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. We're going to continue to learn. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk to folks about how the best companies in the world approach, communicate, and deploy design every single day.
In this episode, we're speaking with Kate Aronowitz. Most recently, Kate was the VP of Design at Wealthfront. She'll focus on her early years at Facebook helping build that team, setting the right expectations for design leaders, and the evolving responsibilities of designers.
We're going to get to this episode after this quick message from our partner. Stick around.
Thanks to Squarespace for their support. Whether you need a domain, a website, or an online store, make your next move with Squarespace. Visit squarespace.com and enter the code HIGHRESOLUTION, one word, for 10% off your first purchase. Kate, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what's one thing about design that's clear to you that's not clear to others?
So I guess my point of clarity is probably a point of unclarity, actually. It's somewhat clear to me that we're at some pivot point or transformation time in our industry. We've come so far. So I graduated from college 20 years ago. About 15 years ago, came out here, got into tech, and we've come so far. You know, at first it was just trying to get a design team, then maybe trying to get them out of product or get them invited to meetings, you know, the whole seat at the table kind of thing. And now, I mean, all great companies really love and value design. Consumers spend more to get better design. We've got great leaders. More kids are going to school for design more than ever. But at the same time, I don't know if it's that the role has gotten so large or so muddled, but there are lots of us having lots of lunches and dinners and coffees, and you guys are putting together this podcast. It's kind of like, what's next? We've had these giant in-house teams. Agencies have kind of transformed. You know, I've had lunches with designers who are ready to be investors, ready to start agencies again, restart professional organizations. And so I guess my point of clarity is that there's definitely something going on right now with the industry, whether it's redefining our roles or figuring out that we're not training people the right way to get them into the industry. But it's kind of exciting to see people kind of branch out and try to figure out how to push us forward yet again and see what's next.
Now, I wonder if it's because there are probably enough companies now where we look to them as design leaders. I don't think we had that a decade ago. Yeah. Right? We had a couple of examples, and now the more accessible companies like Facebook, like LinkedIn, like Airbnb, like we're looking at them now as design leaders, and I wonder if the conversation is finally enough above the radar where it's coming to a head, right? And that's why the industry as a whole is taking notice of the results in these other companies, and have decided to invest in it. So it's interesting on that point. Now that design is finally coming to a head as a function in the industry. Well, the obvious thing is these companies are looking for leaders, right? Because they need someone to shepherd design into their companies. I look around, I guess, in my experience of the last few years of being a design leader, and I found it pretty hard to find people with the experience to come into these companies and actually make change happen. So I wonder if you've had the same experience, and why do you think that is?
Sure. At least once a week, a couple times a month, I get emails in my inbox, you know, we're looking for a new head of design. And it's amazing how many more are coming in. And not only are these small companies, so it's great to see that they're valuing design, but some of these are really amazing companies that can't fill these positions, where I'm kind of shocked. So I started to do something interesting. The past couple of months, I started to respond to the emails. And even though I wasn't interested in taking the role, I thought I want to get on the phone and find out what's going on. Like, is it a supply problem? There aren't enough people? Is it the demand is wrong? Maybe they think they're a design culture, but actually when people are going in to interview, they're finding that, you know, I'm steering clear of that place. So I think it's actually twofold. In fact, recently I actually rewrote a bit of a job description and sent it back to a recruiter because I was pretty frustrated. It was for an app that I use at least a few times a week. I won't say which one. Sounded like a great opportunity. But when they wrote out the role, they wanted someone who could define their product and their services, define all of their design standards, hire a great team, be the voice of quality at the company, roll their hands up and get things dirty. They wanted them to have 15 years of experience. I just read this like 10 minutes ago. 15 years of experience, be a luminary. Like literally I said, you must be a luminary to take this position. And I wrote back and I said, your company's great. It's not that big. It's a director level role. You're never going to find anybody to fill this. And I frankly know very few people that fit this description. Yeah. And he kind of snarked back at me and he said, no, too many leaders get like altitude sickness when we ask them to get down in the details. And so I need somebody that can do it all. And I was like, good luck. I said, if you want to meet, I'd be more than happy to help you with the job description. But it's again, going back to, have we saddled design leaders with too much? The people that just aren't even capable of having these roles, And then getting back to the supply part, my network is only so big, and a lot of the great leaders I know, they're well taken care of. Like, if you've got somebody great, you're going to take care of them, and they've got a good peer system. And a lot of them aren't ready to jump out and go run their own teams. They're happy being part of larger teams. Yeah. And so there's that. And I also think that, frankly, there isn't the training or the mentorship for enough design leadership roles. Design leadership is very, very different than designing. And there isn't anybody out there that's really training design leadership as something.
So on that note, how did you rewrite that job description?
It was more so, I looked at the requirements and I just said, you're not going to get somebody like this, like maybe 10 years of design. I said, take off the luminary part. I said, that doesn't actually do anything for you. And then I kind of separated the job description into two things, more tactical focus and then more kind of team and strategy focused, and said I would pick one or the other. So.
Have you found that these businesses, when they look for these design leaders, that their inclination is to think, so you said that this person wanted the design leader to have it all and do it all, right? Do you think that the perspective of design leaders in businesses today is that the design leaders are too far detached from the work? And is that problematic? Or do you think that it has to be that way?
I think, first of all, in my mind, it's important to establish, and I've always tried to maintain this, that design leadership, there are two paths in design. We have to preserve the path for someone who does want to manage, and then we have to preserve the path for someone who wants to keep designing. I think there are a lot of companies that, in order to get ahead, you've got to put down the work and start managing people. It's a real shame. And everywhere I've worked, I've always had a career ladder where you can get paid exactly the same to keep designing as you would to keep managing up at the director and maybe even VP level. Because I think it's important to preserve that level of being a practitioner. Those are the people that are going to have the breakthroughs and be the luminaries for the other designers.
That's interesting.
And frankly, to kind of remove yourself from the work, it's like great designers design, great leaders kind of enable that design. Yeah. And
you create these environments for the designers to become great. Yeah.
And it's a big move. It's a scary move. And frankly, I wouldn't want people going to management that wouldn't want to value that kind of thing, that don't value the team, value the enable, value the people, value mentorship, value being closer to the business and further from the work. That was always where I gravitated towards. So it was a natural career move for me. But I've seen a lot of other people that were pretty pressured into going into management who were pretty unhappy. And by the way, so were their teams that they were managing.
Yep. It seems like it's becoming a pattern amongst mid to especially large companies where they don't develop that track. Yeah. And then you feel like the logical next step is to become a manager. Yeah. There's some people who are just okay with it, so they do it.
Well, it's because the analogous peers are people on the business side that you have to become a manager, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've done this in other places too. I mean, it's interesting when I interviewed with at Facebook with Mark. Yeah. He had such great perspective on building a great organization. It was this point in time at Facebook where he said to me, he's like, I put all the best people in charge, and it turns out they're not always the best people to run the teams. Right. He's like, so I want somebody that's passionate about this part of design. Like the people he had interviewed before me, he said, frankly, they wanted to be creative directors. They wanted complete control. They wanted power. They weren't about enabling the people and building a great world-class organization. So it also just depends on kind of like values and where you are in your career.
Well, so talk to us now. There are thousands of people and businesses today that haven't established design as a core function. I would maybe look at these businesses as design immature businesses. Maybe not design less, but certainly design immature. Okay, so if we're talking to these business leaders that make these decisions on who to hire next, right? And they've decided that they want to invest in design. What does that first hire look like?
That's a good question. I think there's probably two parts. I think the first hire, wow, it's so critical and probably really hard to make. I've never been the first designer at a company, and I've never had to hire the first designer. But to me, that sounds like the scariest role to take in design, right? So I think the first designer, it's a really unique hire. They've got to be hands-on. You're not hiring an executive as your first designer, right? They've got to be hands-on. They've got to be passionate about the product. And I think they also have to reflect kind of the values of the company and the people that they're joining. This is a small company, presumably, and really getting into their process, their values, and seeing how they're going to deliver. Now, I said it was kind of a two-part question. The other piece, before you hire somebody, I think trying to define what role design plays in your culture. It should be unique to your company. You can't just pick up someone else's design culture and say, oh, this is mine.
Would you say the same for organizing the team as well? Like that has to be, okay.
I really do think so. I think, the first question to kind of ask when you're trying to define your design culture is like, what role does design play in your product? Yep. Is it a true differentiator? Is it not really at this point? Is it just about getting somebody through? Is it more on the brand side? Like the functionality is all there, but wow, we need some amazing marketing and brand things. Are you going to be going to the designer for ideas, product ideas? Or do you have a really strong product team in place and you don't need that? Where is design going to report into? Like all of these kinds of questions. How often are you going to meet with the designer? Like, does the designer have to be with the leadership team a lot, or can they be more mentored and juniored? Like, what's the support system that you're going to give this person on the way in? All of these things can kind of piece together what your design culture is maybe going to look like, and that's what you should be hiring into.
That's very interesting because you notice a lot of startups, especially in San Francisco now, posting their first designer position, and it's always design director or like head of design, right? And you notice a lot of these designers in like smaller, mid-stage companies where they feel like they're not being empowered or their voice isn't being heard. They're gravitating to these roles, and they're going in, but then there's like this miscommunication of like expectations where they feel that they're
I'm head of design and I'm doing
like,
everything and I'm not able to be
It's like my first job is to hire like 3 to 4 designers instead of like to ship the V1 of the product, right? So that's interesting that your perspective is instead of following like this playbook that works for everyone, right? It's finding out what's unique to your culture and helping that influence that hire.
Yeah, I think so. And I somewhat mentioned it, but I think one thing people don't talk enough about when they're hiring designers or when they get overly critical of the first design hire or designers that are already hired is they don't look closely enough at what their product team looks like. Show me a poorly functioning design team and I'll show you a probably non-existent like product management function.
Dive into that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
And I have firsthand experience. Like I can picture people in my mind that have been put on projects where, again, putting a lot of pressure on design. We love it, but sometimes there's too much. That kind of like, we have an idea, design it, and like, we'll know it when we see it. It's like, no. We're not going there, right? Like, if you don't have good product requirements, and some great designers can do this on their own, but it's asking a lot of them, expecting great design to happen is kind of like asking a miracle to happen. It can happen. Yeah. But the product manager's job is to understand the market, understand who you're going for, understand the roadmap. How fast or slow are you going to ship? What does an MVP look like? What business results does this have to deliver? And how can they also clear the way for great design to kind of happen. I'm a firm believer that a great designer needs a great partner in both product and also one in engineering. And when those two things are absent, sometimes you're looking at a designer, what's wrong here? Certainly you should evaluate their skills, but look at the other people that they're working with and see if they're putting too much pressure on design.
How would you delineate so I have some actually pretty strong opinions about this, and I would love your side of this. How would you delineate between like the tripod of engineering, design, and product? What is the role of each when shipping a product or when coming up with ideas? And then do you have any advice for how they can work better together?
Sure. Look, I think in any great team, the roles kind of they cross over at some point, right? If you've ever seen a group that's a team that's in flow and like really in the groove, the product manager, the engineer, everybody's kind of coming up with the best way to do something, and they're truly working as a cross-functional team. But I think at the outset, they also have to have their areas that they're experts in. And I think again, the product manager identifying the market, figuring out the marketing opportunity, the business idea, the competition. How are we going to go to market? Are we going to charge for this thing? Are we not going to charge for this thing? Making sure that we've got resources for it. And the engineer is in charge of really making sure that like technology is brought to bear on the problem. Like the best engineers I've worked with have come and said, you had this design idea. I went home last night. I figured out how to make it better. Instead of saying, no, I can't do that. Like helping you enhance them.
And by building a prototype, or how does that work?
Yeah, by building a prototype, or the mobile team actually at Wealthfront is like phenomenal at this. They're so passionate and excited about quality interfaces and product that a lot of times they'll just push things further rather than saying no. But a great design or a front-end engineer should also say no on occasion. At Facebook and other places, we used those kinds of teams to be a checks and balances with the design team. So I'm a stickler for standards. I think when you have design guidelines and standards and components, you use them. It should be very rare that you break the rules. And so when they're programmed in to the front end, the engineer can come by and say, I'm not doing this. Tell me why I should spend an extra day to create this new shade of blue for you, or this new component, or round all the corners instead of squaring them off. Those are the kind of relationships that I think are powerful and kind of also just keep each other in check.
So that checks and balances approach is pretty interesting. I've seen different systems before. I've seen the traditional where product management is almost like the designer's manager, where they go away, they come back with all this stuff, and they're like, hey, don't ask me why. This is why. This is what we have to build, and this. Not even this is why we have to build it. Just this is what we have to build, right? Yeah. And then the designer goes off and makes magic happen, disappears, and then comes back and then just drops like a PSD or like a sketch file in engineering and say, build this, right? Then you have the slightly alternative approach where product management is still like the manager. They kind of loop engineering in to just make sure like, is this gonna like work out in the timeline that like we're being pressured to hit? And then they drop specs and guidelines on design and say, design this, right? I'm biased, so I feel that the checks and balances approach makes sense. Kind of like reminds me of the way the U.S. government's run.
Yes.
But But imagining that, assuming that the majority of cultures are not this, how does a team actually get from that to this checks and balances approach, right? Because if I'm a designer and I just heard this, I want to like go show this clip and say like, hey guys, this is why we should do it, right? But just saying this is why we should do it sounds biased. It's like, I'm not doing it to get power, I'm doing it because it's a better process, right? But how does someone actually make that transition?
Yeah, so first of all, I think, I've seen this mistake happen. I think at a kickoff meeting or whatever you call the beginning of a project at your company, the engineer, the designer, and the PM all have to be present. Now the engineer may not get a call for a couple of weeks, but they all have to be present. And there should be some agreed upon process on how you're all gonna work together. And I don't like prescribing that because I think some teams, the PM is really strong. Other teams, the designer is really strong. Other times, like what you're building is so far out there that the engineer has to be involved all the time. So I think that teams should really figure out what's going to yield the best result. Getting back to the checks and balances, I'm not sure if you're specifically talking about like guidelines and using those with designers and engineers. I mean, I think using standard components benefits everybody, benefits the end user because they recognize certain patterns and usage things, and they can learn how to use your product much faster. It should benefit everybody in-house because it should enable faster work. I always say, like, innovate where it counts, don't innovate where you already have patterns and things like that. That's one way I think checks and balances can be really important.
Okay. So assuming that, an early stage company has decided that, hey, design, we could try this thing out. They define their culture to some extent. They're like, okay, we have a product manager, or we have a really strong product or marketing presence in this company, and this is the kind of designer we're looking for. They make that hire, assuming they have a product manager on the team and things are going well, right? Another designer's brought on, another designer, another engineer, whatever it is. And they're at this point where it's like, okay, it seems like we're actually building a team now.
Yeah.
What does progress look like over the course of, say, 3 months, 6 months, a year? Like, how do they know that they're moving in the right direction? And what are some challenges that they could expect to come up as they grow?
I think progress, first and foremost, is probably in the end product. If things are shipping at a regular clip, I'm a firm believer that everything that we do, like, at the end of the day, we're all employed by companies, and if we're not doing things in the name of, like, good business or good user experience, like, then we're all just kind of designing for ourselves. So if things are shipping pretty quickly or at an expected pace, I think that that's good. If all of a sudden things start to really slow down and decisions are really hard to make, that usually says to me that, like, something is amiss. And I also think that anytime, probably when you have like 3 designers, it's probably time to get a manager. And designers, after a year or so, you can hire them in, get them excited, but like anybody, they're eventually going to say, what's my career path? How am I going to get projects that are going to stretch me in the right way? I've got way too much on my plate. I don't know how and when to push back. Feels like we're about to define our own process. I'm not sure how that should happen. So it's kind of process things, the career path things, decision making, I think are all usually signs that it's time to kind of put a real group together. And also, if other things at the company are taking off wildly, if you're hiring 10 engineers and you're only going to hire 1 designer, like, I'd ask you, like, why? To truly scale a team, it takes a lot of effort. Even just, I've managed really big teams. In the most recent team I managed was only 5 or 6, but each one of those seats had to have a very particular kind of personality, talent, want, desire, to make up that right team.
And do you define that on the onset, or do you define it as you hire people and figure out what the delta is between what you're looking for and what they actually bring?
A little bit of both, I would say. Yeah. I would say, like, I definitely, when people are being hired in, one thing I always ask myself is, like, if they showed up on Monday, like, what projects would I give them? Yeah. And if I have a big kind of blank stare, like, it's probably not a good hire.
Yeah. One of the things that designers say a lot is, we need a seat at the table. I personally find this really irksome, right? Because it reeks of entitlement, right? You don't need a seat at the table. You need to drive revenue, and that'll get you the seat at the table.
Exactly.
Right? What are the skills that we're missing, just as a design community? What are some of the things that we're not paying attention to today that we really need to start thinking about?
Yeah. I've always found, to your point, getting a seat at the table, like, no great designer who's delivering is ever, like, left in the corner. They will come to you. They will, you know what I mean? Produce
the business will come back
results.
To you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that some of the things we're missing out on, and I don't see this with everybody, but it is too common a habit. Designers can be very kind of myopically focused on what they're doing. You walk around an office and you hear everybody kind of talking about, like, industry news or industry gossip or what's going on in the business, and you don't hear that over in the design corner. Like, I always made it a point, I was a very junior designer for many years myself. Like, I got to the meetings early. I always read the brief a few times. I was prepared with comments and questions. stuff that had nothing to do with design.
So preparedness,
but outside of design.
right?
Like, no one is going to care what you're doing unless it translates to results for the rest of them. So, having meetings, and yes, you want to talk about design, but you have to put it through the lens of what the business is trying to accomplish. For instance, at Wealthfront, really, really important to build trust and understanding ahead of time, right? That was design's role for quite a while. We're asking somebody to give us their money, it's a big deal. So if I could translate design into building trust and understanding, people want to hear about it. Not just, I've got this great illustration strategy and it's very human. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So.
What do you think is the difference between a design VP and a design director?
Yeah. My very generic definition of kind of director VP that I've heard a couple other companies use as well is a director runs a function. And it runs it completely. You are responsible for design at a company, and that means everything from making sure that the team has the right hardware and software, lighting, that the PMs are treating them well, that the capacity for the team is okay, that there's a hiring plan in place. That's a lot to do as a director to run an entire function, and kind of the buck stops with you. But a VP then is kind of the next level up in terms of scope at the company. So not only are they responsible for a function, but not to borrow the term, you have a seat at the table when making really big business and company decisions. So at Wealthfront, I wasn't only responsible for design, but I was in on a lot of big company decisions, which meant I had to understand our balance sheet. I had to understand when we were going to, get our next round of investing. Had to make a lot of trade-offs. And are we going to spend this money now or spend it later? When I became a VP and I got invited to these meetings, I was a bit of a fish out of water. I would joke, I went to art school. This isn't what I went to school for. And I found two really great mentors that I could just ask any question. I would leave the meeting and say, I had no idea what you guys were talking about. Please explain this to me. And after a while, it became apparent. But I think if you're seeing companies asking for design leaders or VPs that are really going to be on the executive team. Now, I was on the executive team at Facebook, but there was kind of a smaller, I used to joke that we were at the kids' table. There was a smaller group like Mark and Searle that were driving a lot of the business decisions. I was in on some of those, not all of them. If you're thinking about creating a VP position or you're interviewing for a VP position, you want to know why they want design in the room at that time. It's not just, it's the next rung on the ladder. It's why do you want Kate in the room? What perspective of I'm bringing from design that's going to bear on really big business decisions? I think that's really, really important. It helped me gain confidence when I was in the room. Okay, this is what they're looking for from me. They're not looking for the same perspective as everyone else.
I have a point on that.
Yeah.
This is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
This is kind of an amazing area to explore. So I find it really interesting that you did, in fact, quote, have a seat at the table at a lot of these executive decisions. Yeah. What was the perspective that you were asked to bring, or what did you actually bring to the table that was different? Yeah.
I think first and foremost, I thought kind of through the client's eyes and kind of the experience that they were going to have, the parts of the experience that were going to be easy, more difficult, maybe where we should spend more time, because I'm spending more time with clients and understanding, what's working, what's not working. I think also the lens of the brand. What ramifications these decisions would have for our brand offering? Were we going to be appealing more to new clients, older clients? Were we building out a space where it didn't feel like we needed something? Things like that. Budgeting questions, thinking a lot about headcount. Being a VP or director, as much as a designer would want you to, you can't always just defend your own team. You have to think about the company at large, which means sometimes saying, I don't need the next designer because I think we need it more in customer support. Or I'd rather have a marketing team than get a research team on my team. A lot about leadership is knowing when and how far to stick up for the design team and what you think is right. And then sometimes, unfortunately, like disappointing your team by kind of coming back and saying, no, this is what we have to do because it's the right thing overall for the business, and making those unpopular kind of calls.
Thanks again to Squarespace for supporting this show. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to get a domain, create a website, or build an online store. They offer domains with SSL certificates and WHOIS privacy that you can seamlessly connect to your Squarespace website or online store. They take care of everything for you. Nowadays, your domain is your online identity. It's the first thing people see when they visit your site. It helps build credibility, and honestly, it just makes you look more professional. So why mess it up? Squarespace offers an easy way to find a domain that works for you or your business. They even host it for you, all in one place. So if you've been thinking about getting a domain for your new project or personal site, go to squarespace.com and enter the offer code HIGHRESOLUTION, that's one word, to get 10% off your first purchase. Make your next move with Squarespace. We'd also like to thank our friends at InVision for their support. InVision is the world's leading product design platform, powering the future of digital design through their deep understanding of the importance of collaboration. They're used by some of the most innovative companies in the world like Facebook, Capital One, Airbnb, and Netflix. Let me tell you 3 reasons why I'd use it. 1, poor communication is one of the biggest blockers for talented teams. 2, when you don't get feedback from others early and often, you can get lost in the woods, and that's just bad for everyone. And 3, without a prototype, it can be hard to show others your full vision for a design. InVision solves all of that. You can rapidly prototype at the front end of the design process and collaborate across every stage of the project. It simplifies virtually every aspect of the design workflow and makes collaboration a core part of the process for everyone, from project managers to designers, developers, and writers. Teams that build digital products are at a serious advantage when they use InVision's suite of prototyping and collaboration tools. It's the best way to get everyone on board. Visit InVisionApp.com and use our access code INV-HIGHRESOLUTION for 3 months free. So Kate, you started off as a principal designer, became a design manager, design director, all the way to a vice president. How did you, that's a pretty good career path. That's
the hockey stick.
Hockey stick is, yeah, people like to call it. But how did you navigate that path?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that before I was ever a principal designer, I did, I think, 8 years of design. My first job out of school was at an in-house team for a natural supplements company. I used to literally retouch muscles on muscle people.
Wow, that's awesome.
These ads.
Yeah.
I kind of did everything. I was so excited to have a job. I can remember them doing these big branding projects and I wasn't asked to participate. And I just did my own comps and put them in with the other ones and said, hey guys, I showed up with some stuff. We did a lot of print design and I would volunteer to go sleep literally at the press checks on a couch like this. I truly viewed it as an apprenticeship. I don't know anybody that told me to do it that way, but I really worked hard underneath really good people. After that, I went to an agency. I feel like being both in-house somewhere and also benefiting from being in an agency is such a great experience. So at the agency, understanding how to sell work, working with a great account manager. I traveled when no one else wanted to travel. I remember one time flying to Germany for 48 hours to deliver a design presentation. I was 22 and I was like, okay, I'll go to Munich overnight. And
was that the first time you had presented something?
No, I had been there before.
Got it. Okay.
But they said, these were all people that had families. I'm not going to Germany. I was like, I'll go.
Right. Yeah, no kidding.
My best friend to this day is still the girl that sat next to me, at that agency. And the two of us were like, well, we'll go, So, and learning so much under great people was really important to me. I worked under 2 phenomenal creative directors who in critique would slaughter your work. But you know what? You learn a lot around detail. I can remember them, looking at some of my logos and they'd stand back and they'd say, it's obviously you didn't look at this from 10 feet because it looks like a mess from out here. I'm like, okay, I will never make that mistake again. Or you didn't use the right typeface. If you look at all this is correct. You didn't do it right. Okay. So there was a lot of learning that I did on the job. And then at eBay, I started at eBay. I had no web experience. I did PowerPoint presentations for them. And again, went over to the newly formed user experience team there. and did marketing graphics for them, and slowly just kind of eased my way into kind of finally working on like their search product, their feedback product, buying, selling, all of that in the early 2000s, which was a really interesting time. They had a great PM team, and I learned a tremendous amount. So before I was ever a manager, before I was ever a principal, there was a lot of being the second designer on a lot of things, and a lot of late nights and weekends kind of working on things. And then from there, I think the first inkling that I wanted to be a manager was that, inevitably designers will eventually clash with business people or disagree on something or disagree with the PM. Yes, always happens. I was always the one that was like wanted to stay after and figure out why.
Right.
Like go out to the lunch with the person from the business unit and figure out like, well, why are they so frustrated with us, And so I kept doing that over and over again, and to the point where I said, I care more about this and I get more excited about this than actually designing. And you have those moments where you're like, if I was doing that, I could do it better. And so I just asked for permission to do it. And the first team I managed was only 2 people. I can still remember them. It was 2 women. I remember walking in my first day as their boss and just taking it so seriously. Like all of a sudden you're responsible for their careers. You're responsible to make sure that like they're doing great work. They have the tools that they can, use, and that they're going to get to go somewhere. So it's a big breaking point that I don't think people really take heart to, going from a designer to like managing designers. And then, eventually becoming a director and then VP.
So I might argue that you probably had the most massive impact of your career at Facebook. Mm-hmm. I really want to go back into that first conversation you had with Zuck. Mm-hmm. There was obviously a moment in time where Facebook decided to invest in design heavily, mm-hmm. and you were there. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that conversation. What were you guys talking about? What did he see that most other people in the industry just weren't seeing?
Sure. I should add that the reason I got the call to Facebook was from one of the business people at eBay that had remembered that I was always somebody that Bill could relate. So it's a very good lesson.
That's a lesson. There we go. There we go. Yeah.
Don't burn any bridges.
Right.
And she runs people at Facebook, Lori Goller. Like she's been an amazing mentor and supporter of like my entire career. So the very first conversation, so I was at LinkedIn, I'd only been there for 9 months and I was happily there. I like staying at a place for a long time. I like those relationships. I like knowing the business. And I kept referring people into Facebook and they're like, no, they all want to be creative directors. Mark wants somebody that wants to come and build like the best design team in the world. And I was like, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. So it took months. Afternoon by afternoon, I would just go over and kind of speak to one person at a time. And I didn't want to speak to Mark until I knew that I was serious. I didn't want to waste his time. And I went over there one evening and we sat and we talked. And the thing that Mark brought to that was the same thing. It's the same values he brings to everything. You see his posts now. He's an avid learner. I mean, he has such an open mind. And when he wants to know something about, a subject, he is not afraid to ask questions. So a lot of it was him just asking me questions and me asking questions back. I remember saying, how user-centered would you say Facebook is? And he's like, what does it mean to be user-centered? Yeah. It was like how great to just like ask that question. Yeah. And he was just very open with me that he wanted a team that would help scale. I mean, he was very focused on scale. Mm-hmm. And what that meant for design was scaling the site, which meant a relentless kind of focus on consistency and components, things that we could replicate really quickly. Yeah. He saw the benefit of that internally, but he also saw it for users. He was like, if they learn how to use Facebook, they understand the news feed, then they can understand how to use photos and understand how. He was very smart and ahead of his time and thinking.
Were you guys like thinking about research as well? Were you thinking about user experience?
There was already a research team. So the good thing, there was already an established team when I got there. There were about 22 people that spanned communication or marketing design, product design, research, and then there was a small kind of front end team that was budding. But the very first assignment that Mark gave me when I got there is he said he wanted us to have design principles. And the cool thing about that was why he asked. He said, I want you to be able to come in and bring design to the table, and I want us to have a common language on how we can evaluate it, because I don't want to just tell you I like something or I don't like something. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
By the way, like that is massive foresight on his part to understand.
Amazing,
like,
right? I mean, like to have
cool.
somebody say that to you
That's when you knew you were at the right place.
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely.
And did this become like a shared language between you, Zuck, and engineering, like the other departments?
Mostly design and Mark and the other PMs. I mean, like we had other really great leaders at the company too. It's interesting. I'd love to talk to other teams and find out, like, do design principles actually get used?
Yeah.
I have to say I don't know how often they got used, but the process of writing them and debating them was probably more valuable than anything that actually followed on from there.
Yeah, I don't know how many people know this, but Chamath Palihapitiya is like well known to have put this growth team together, and apparently the first ever growth team, the way it was done at Facebook anyway. How the entire point of the growth team obviously was to grow as quickly as possible. I mean, that, in bare bones language, that's what it was. How did design, because you were there when that team was put together, how did you engineer the design team for him and the effort that he was putting together on the growth team?
Yeah. So the growth team had probably been in place, I don't know, for almost a year or something before I got there, and they already had a designer working with it. We're no stranger to metrics in design. I mean, as far back as we've been doing design within business, there's always like measurable outcomes and optimizing and things like that. But to your point, we had massive goals. Every group at Facebook had massive goals. At the time, I think we were trying to get to 100 million users on Facebook monthly. MySpace was still bigger than us, if that puts some context in. And the growth designers, again, what was interesting from my perspective, people didn't want to design for the growth team because they thought that the numbers were just going to dictate what they had to do. But what Chamath encouraged the team to do, and this was the first time I thought about things this way, was to really swing wide with experiments. So as designers, we're frightened to experiment with anything we're not comfortable shipping. Like, well, I would never ship that. I'm not going to give that to them. But on that team, they would test extremes to kind of see what the tolerance of the users or the business was, which I thought was really interesting. So swing wide, launch these wildly different things at the end of the spectrum, and then you will end up finding the limits. Because if you just start in the middle and you go pixel by pixel out, you'll actually never know how far you can push things. And the designers that worked with his team were probably better versed in the business. They were faster. They could hang in a big group discussion like better than many other designers could, and there was also like an amazing camaraderie on his team too. And by the way, they got recognized a lot at the company, which is kind of fun. So, so many other companies have these growth teams, and again, I still see designers kind of stay away from that function. But man, I think if you're a new designer, what a great place to start and learn the business.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So. Yeah, great team, learned a lot of lessons. They're still working hard. A lot of the same people are still there that I admire to this day, and they've got a pretty large design team, by the way.
That's great.
I think that's how Luke Woods came in. He started to lead the growth team. It was the first time that we had like a real design leader in growth.
So while you're at Facebook, you helped scale the design team from about 20 people to 200. And it seems like you guys had a relentless focus on your designing your design process or recruiting process, right? So what did that look like?
So as I mentioned, everyone at Facebook had really big goals. It's one thing if somebody tells you have to hire like 5 designers or 5 people this year. You think, okay, well, we can make a few tweaks and we'll probably end up with 5. But when he says you have to hire 25 or 30, which was in my mind insane, it makes you, at Facebook we talk a lot about hacking things. It makes you think, how are we going to hack this process? Like there's got to be a shortcut. There's got to be something we can do. So the very first thing we did, we pulled recruiting in, and just like you would draw a business funnel, we drew a funnel on the board. Top of funnel, how many people, we had numbers for every single stage in the funnel. So the year before I got there, 12 months, they'd hired 1 designer. So we knew at the bottom of the funnel there was only 1. So how many people had applied or had we sourced? how many people went to phone screen. After phone screen, how many people came on site? I think at the time we still had a design exercise. How many did the exercise? Yeah. How many people got through to offer? And then how many people accepted? And we literally, I mean, it took us years to get through all of this, but we dissected every piece of the funnel. Like phone screens. Okay, what's the script? Is that everybody getting the same standard questions? Why is one person saying yes and everyone else is saying no? On-site interviews were wildly varying, sometimes people got a tour at the beginning, sometimes people didn't get a lunch, sometimes Mark would pop in and say hello. I mean, the company was still small at the time, and you have to remember, we were smaller than MySpace. I got turned down a lot. We had a lot of offers that were rejected. I used Mark a lot, I used Searle a lot, I used a lot of people to help get people through, but we designed the entire candidate experience top to bottom.
How many designers were at the top of funnel, and then at the end of that, what was the percentage in the difference?
Oh gosh, I wish I could remember this kind of stuff.
I'd imagine it was pretty significant if you had a drop off and if you guys were optimizing the funnel as well.
But we got to the point where we had twice weekly recruiting meetings. We made it everyone's job. Every design manager and pretty much every designer was in charge of sourcing. We would have these big source-a-thons. And that's where we kind of came up with this idea of this dream list. So, okay, we have to hire 20 or 30 designers. Let's make it even cooler if we actually start putting the best designers in the world on this list.
And on that note of best designers in the world, I don't know if people know this, but you either managed or mentored Luke Woods and Julie Zhu, both of whom are VPs or heads of design currently at Facebook. Tell us about that. What did you see in them? How did you help grow them or manage them?
Well, Julie was a manager when I interviewed. I can still remember I was supposed to interview with her for about 40 minutes, and I think we spent more than 2 hours in a conference room. She had this big Stanford sweatshirt on, and she had started, I think, as a CS intern at Facebook.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I mean, she's always had leadership qualities. I think the thing that I saw in Julie, she was never fazed by anything that happened at work. I mean, we had major goals. There was a lot to get done, and she just had this heads down pursuit of always doing the right thing. And she also had really good ideas on other people. I think she was one of the people that originally kind of designed this UIE team, this user interface engineering team, right? Which wasn't really a front end team, and they weren't designers. She mentored and hired in just an amazing group of people. I mean, it's great to see her then now kind of share lessons learned. It wasn't always easy. We had a lot of, struggles and conflict. We'd have long discussions about what the role of a product designer was versus a communication designer, how design should be enabled at the company. And she's also just a really great designer in her own right. And then Luke, also amazing, but a very different kind of personality. We put him on the list. He was at the IDEO Chicago office, and at the time, we were looking for people that were really strong on process. And Luke, as you'll see, is one of those people, at least he was with me. I had weekly one-on-ones with him, and very little words, but just the best listener and so perceptive, could just say a few words. He was very comfortable with silence and very comfortable with questions, which was great because Facebook, there was usually just a lot of people trying to talk and get their words in. So I learned a tremendous amount actually from both of them and feel lucky to have worked with them.
So in this interviewing process, what were you looking for in particular? What did you define as a Facebook designer at that time?
That's a good question. It was a pretty hefty load. So we were looking for people, I think it was 4 or 5 things. So you had to be a great visual designer because we didn't have a split. So you had to be able to ship, you had really good taste. We looked for details. Were details overlooked in their portfolio? Did they really care about shipping polish? Great interaction design skills, so understanding, flows and in and out and how things were going to connect. And then the other 2 things that we had on the plate were somewhat new and somewhat controversial. The next one was, they called it product sense, right? It's kind of that elusive product sense, right? Can you articulate kind of a product or user need and talk about and conceive of what the solution would be. So not just take specs and build them, but really be at the table and understand the dynamics. And at Facebook, a lot of it, we talked about what were the benefits to the individual, and then what were going to be the benefits to the network from any product that we launched. And then the last thing that we kind of got rid of when I started was everyone had to code and push all their stuff live.
Wow.
Yes.
You started that.
I got rid of it. That was probably the most controversial thing when I first started. I remember interviewing with this guy, Mike Schrepfer, who's a dear friend and was one of my bosses there. He was the CTO at Facebook, and I remember walking around Palo Alto with him, and I said, you gotta know that when I come in, like, designers aren't coding anymore. And I know that's gonna be unpopular, but I can't imagine you're hiring people that can do all this. Now, to their credit, and I still know they're amazing designers, there was a group of people there that could do it. But we were growing too fast. We couldn't wait for that.
It wasn't scalable.
Yeah, and then Julie, said, well, if we're gonna do this, let's set up the UIE team. And that team became like one of the most badass engineering teams. They were just fantastic.
So you spoke about this funnel, this hiring funnel that you worked on with the recruiting team.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't talk too much about where these candidates were being sourced from.
Yeah.
But one thing that became clear is Facebook took some unconventional methods, and one of them was looking at agencies. So you helped in shepherding acquisitions like Sofa and Hot Studio and Push Pop Press, right? And I believe up until that point, it was pretty unconventional to do that, right?
Yeah, and there were even smaller shops before that. There was a husband and wife team, Matt and Tiffany Brown. She later went on to be creative director at Pinterest. That we sourced kind of anywhere. We had giant names on the list, like Mike Mattis, who was on the original iPhone, and he joined us for a couple years. Like Evan Sharp, who came and joined us for a year when Pinterest was kind of a little thing and not doing much. Like Nick Felton, who did his annual reports, we got him to join for a year or two. So we looked everywhere for inspiration. I can remember staying up late at night, sourcing on my iPad was relatively new, and all the apps, just finding apps I liked, and then doing the detective work to figure out who built them. That's where Push Pop Press came from. The Sofa guys were so attractive because they built and launched their own products. So they weren't just an agency that was designing for someone else. They actually had their own products, and they were just remarkably smart. They were a great team. It hadn't occurred to me that we could purchase a company, but I remember talking to Mark specifically, I think actually about the Gowalla team, which was like this old app in Austin, Texas. And I said, but it's like a company, but there's only like 3 designers, like Adam Michaela and Keegan Jones and Josh Williams. And I was like, do you buy a company? And he's like, you do if you know you're going to get even just a few people that are going to come and make an impact on the company, which was great. The Hot Studio acquisition I would put in its own bucket. I mean, that was just a scale that was crazy. I mean, I'm probably going to get the numbers wrong. I feel like there were 60-something people working there at the time, and we took 30-something. And I credit this woman who's still there. She's a VP, Margaret Stewart, for kind of shepherding that through. She'd known Maria, who owned and ran Hot for years. And Margaret was in charge of basically building out the business side of the design team. She needed like 30 or 40 designers now. And none of the regular designers wanted to go over and do that, which is another lesson. I don't say yes to this kind of stuff. You learn so much. And so we kept trying to source different people, and she came in and she said, I think Maria might want to join. It'd be a great experience for their team. We get a team that's already used to working together. And so we spent months up here interviewing the designers and working things out. And we had a war room and making sure that everything was going to work out. Those were really, really cool experiences. I learned a lot about also how to just assimilate a team that comes in that's been acquired, good and bad things to do. But
what are a few of those? Because,
So I think, unfortunately, we probably did this a bit with Sofa, we had kind of the drop and scatter model. It was and you get a designer, and you get a designer. They just became resources on a sheet, which I knew at the time was probably not the right thing to do, but that's what we needed. Later teams, when Nick and Ryan came in from Nick Felton's team, like we said, okay, you guys are going to work together. Like the Hot Studio team, you're going to work together. We allowed teams to kind of drop, assimilate together, and maintain those relationships, and then let them kind of peek out and see what else was going on. And we also then started asking them to teach us things instead of making them indoctrinate into the Facebook way of things. We said, teach us classes. How did you guys do things? Like making it feel like we were welcoming their kind of cultural like rituals and processes in. Like if you guys used to do drinks on Thursday night, we're going to start doing that to like welcome you into the fold. So assimilating the cultures rather than just like dropping and scattering.
And was that pretty organic, just like, hey guys, this is what we used to do, or was there like time dedicated to this?
Yeah, I think also just, one of the things that we found out in acquisition, people don't always have a choice whether they're going to join or not. But when going through the offer process with designers, we really optimized to really get to know the person and what they valued to make sure that we made the right match on day one with the project that they were going to come and do. I mean, we used to orchestrate offers like you wouldn't believe. Like, do we take them out for coffee? Do we take them to dinner? What do they like? Should we have somebody pop by and say hello afterwards? Who's going to be the first phone call in the morning that they receive? Like, does Kate give the offer? Does the really, designing that experience.
True design.
It was.
Kate, so we've sourced some questions from our community. We reached out to folks, and we've picked a few questions that we want to ask every guest. And I'd like to start with, how do you explain the role of design to people in the business?
That's actually a really hard question. If it's someone that already has a business or they're thinking about design, I'd try to put it into context of what they're trying to do, rather than just saying, oh, design is about a brand, or it's about the relationship that you have with your customer, or it's about, the touch point, or bringing ideas to life. Like, all of that sounds great, and those are all things we can do. But finding out kind of what's important to this person's business and thinking carefully about the role that design can play. For instance, there's a company I'm talking to right now. They know they need a head of design. And I love that they reached out. They said, we actually don't know what we're looking for. Can you come hang out with the team for a couple weeks and figure it out? And so I'm about to start, spending a couple weeks with them and actually figuring out the role that design plays there, so we can articulate it and then try to find someone to lead it. So I know it's kind of a fuzzy answer, but...
No, that's good. It's like design is elastic in that sense.
It is. Yeah. It is. Sometimes it's the facilitator, sometimes it's just the doer and the maker. It's hard to say.
And you always describe it in the language the business understands.
I think so.
You don't focus on the craft so much as you focus on...
Make it so they can actually picture it happening in their office and get excited about it.
Right.
Because it can be intimidating. Sometimes people like design, it's like, well, I don't have good taste, or it's all about, people in black turtlenecks and there's very difficult to work with. Like, no, if you make it something that they can relate to that's going to drive success, then why wouldn't they care?
So a second question, in your most recent role at Wealthfront, how was the design team organized there?
Sure. Pretty simply. So there were only 5 designers and a researcher. So that was really how it was. They all reported into me. I decided that when I joined the company with such a small team, that it was fun to go back to being a little loose with things. Like, do the things you can do when your team, I used to joke, they can all fit around my dining room table. Like, they'd come to my house for offsites. We'd go out to dinner a lot. I was also pretty flexible on what they worked on. When I first joined, the previous manager, or the team, I should say, kind of structured like, you're on growth and you're on investment products. And why not be flexible, guys? We're a small team. Let's stretch. Why don't we pair up once in a while? I really got to know each one of the designers, what their strengths were, what they liked working on, what I thought that they were capable of, and also knowing the other people in the company and just trying to pair them up. That's how the team was set up.
When you're the only designer in a company, how do you convince the business people, not the non-designers, of the value of design, the stuff that you bring to the table?
So I have a snarky answer to that first. If you're the only designer at a company that doesn't value design, it's a really bad place used to be. I'd be shocked that it's almost like, why did you hire me? You know what I mean? Like, you went through the trouble to hire me. Trying to convince them that design matters when you're the only designer. I'm going to sound like a broken record. Try to do as much listening as you can and try to reflect their values and their interests back to them. And I also think that if you're the only designer at a company, it can be very lonely. Join a community, get a friend, get a mentor, participate in groups. There are lots of good Google groups and Slack groups and meetings. Make sure you find somebody that can give you tips. The other thing I guess I would say is there's got to be somebody at the company that cares what you're doing. It might not be the person you're trying to get through to, but sometimes finding
like a sponsor or something.
Exactly. I love the word sponsor because I think a mentor and a sponsor are two really different things.
Absolutely.
A sponsor is somebody that's going to look out for you, make sure you're taken care of, versus a mentor. And I think sometimes they get conflated. Yeah. And there's sometimes that you need one or you need the other. Yeah. And I've tried to be that, honestly. Like, once I found myself with, not power, but a seat at the table, whatever. Like,
influence, right?
There were a lot of people that I tried to look out for, and some of them were in roles that had nothing to do with what I was doing. They could be in finance or HR or product management. I think it's kind of your duty when you become kind of a leader to make sure you're looking out for other people.
So when you're a designer, a manager, it really doesn't matter. How do you present? Well, first off, measure and present the design results from your work. Mm-hmm. And this could be to fellow designers to show whether or not this idea or this direction made sense, or especially to leadership.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think putting it into a language that makes a difference to the business. I would assume that whatever project you're on has a goal, so measure it against that goal somehow. And then, layer in your design goals underneath that. At Facebook, some of the design goals could have been or let's say business goals. I remember site speed was a massive goal for us. We would bring up the site on many different browsers, and sometimes it was painfully slow. So you think about, okay, site speed's a goal for the company. How can design make a difference? Sometimes it's not readily apparent. It's kind of working backwards from what they care about. So using the same components. Okay, you go to the engineer. What would make the code lighter weight? What am I doing that's adding weight to the site? Okay, things like that. And also just being versant in the business and things that other people are caring about. Know the industry that you're in. Know what other people are doing. Drop that in conversation. And sometimes, I don't want to sound like I'm just trying to get all the designers to drop all the design speak. That's not what I'm advocating for.
Wouldn't hurt.
It wouldn't hurt. I mean, what's interesting, not to sidetrack too much, but the woman who took my place at Wealthfront, the cool thing about her is she's actually a researcher. She's not a designer, but she's amazing. She's an IDEO background. And I asked her to come in. The first couple of weeks, I said, just go to lots of meetings and tell me what you see. So she'd shadow all the designers, and she'd come in and she'd say, well, they all say they love design, and they have the designers at all the meetings, and your designers are really busy. But I don't think anybody actually understands what this team does. And I'd been running it for 18 months, and I'm like, okay, that's tough to hear, but thank you for the feedback. I'm like, what do you think we need to do? And she's like, you need to kind of take the mystique off the team. We need to get together as a team. We need to define our process. It needs to fit on a handy dandy slide that you can show to somebody, and it will help everybody immensely. So you can point to, no, we're actually in the understand phase, and it's okay to ask questions, or no, you know what, we're trying to ship next week, and you're asking questions that belong back here.
Yeah.
So again, explaining.
And that becomes a learning process for everyone. It's reinforcing.
So she said, I'm seeing the designers and they're getting pulled into every which way, And then other goals, obviously, related to design, measuring brand loyalty, getting into a lab and understanding how easy is something to use. The numbers will tell you what someone's doing, but they don't tell you why or how someone's feeling. Yeah. So really representing that is always important. And if you're at a company that doesn't care about that, then that's a red flag, I guess.
So we can end with this.
Yeah.
As the purpose of design continues to evolve, what are some of the roles and methodologies you think designers need to start thinking about and paying attention to over the next 5 years? And businesses,
Sure.
not just designers.
Sure. So for roles, I think the role of the designer has gotten very vast.
Yeah.
And I think some companies are now experimenting with like design producers or design partners, people that are really good at this kind of facilitation phase. Like I love the Sprint book by the Google Ventures team. Like that's a real skill to be able to facilitate something like that. And it might not be the same person that's at the desk actually, pushing the pixels and stuff like that. So maybe there are more roles as everybody gets really stretched thin. It's very hard to do all of it at once, being comfortable splitting some of those roles out. As far as disciplines go, there's such cool stuff going on. I got to go up to Amazon recently and heard their voice design team present. I'm like, voice design, what is that? I'm like, that's a thing? I'm like, that is cool. And it was amazing. I mean, they study like speech patterns and recognition and how long can Alexa speak before someone will forget it, and how can you like make it welcoming? Fascinating. Like if I was to go back in time in school, I would like study voice design, semantics, and things like that. The other thing that they're showing, and we're seeing in a lot of places, is kind of intersection of hardware and software. It used to be like the industrial designers go like work on fancy like drills or furniture or tables, but now it's like hardware and software like coming together is super cool. Even about cars or I love my Alexa in my house, things like that. And then not to get political, but just thinking about communication and this election and thinking about kind of the role that design plays in sharing of information and expression or identifying good sources and bad sources of information, bringing people together, using design to protest or give people a voice, or thinking about automation and the role that design plays in that and what that's doing to the job force. I mean, there's a lot to think about right now. That's much bigger than anything we've seen in the past 10 years, which is cool. So,
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Kate.
you.
Hey, you made it to the end. Congratulations. Thanks for watching the episode. I really, really hope you liked it. If you did like it, please leave us a review on the iTunes store. And by the way, if you have any questions that came up because of the content that we covered with our guests, go on YouTube, go on Twitter. You can tweet us, you can leave us a comment. We'll get back to you. We'll help you as much as possible. @HighRes Podcast. That's the screen name or the handle for Twitter, for Instagram, for Facebook. Find us, talk to us. We want to converse with you. We're not going to leave here, by the way, without also thanking our friends at Searle Video. They've been an amazing partner on this entire project. So Searle Video is a creative studio based out of Portland, Oregon. They've helped creative communities tell stories for over 10 years. They've done advertisements, behind-the-scene footage, and documentaries for companies like Google, Slack, XOXO Festival, Adobe, Intel. They're incredible. They've traveled with us through the entire country documenting these stories with our guests. That's incredible. Thank you so much, Searle. Listen, if you're a startup looking to elevate your product, if you're a big company looking to humanize your brand, if you're someone in the creative community who just wants to tell a story, you've got to check out the team at Searle Video. It's searlevideo.com, SEARLE video.com. Check out our friends at Searle. Thank you so much, guys. You guys have been incredible on this project.